The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the wonderful World of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun. It's Cartoonerific. Yeah! It's Cartoonerific. Cartoonerific. It's Cartoonerific. With your host, Brian Mitchell.
Well, welcome to the Cartoonerific podcast, classic animated cartoons. I am Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. You know, one of the things I find interesting is when people really want to do something, it's amazing the strides they can make and the progress that they can do to get to where they want to be. And it's really all about persistence. And, you know, getting into any artistic profession is hard. It requires a lot of effort. You know, there has to be some talent there, and then you have to develop that talent. It takes a little bit of time, but you have to know what you want to do. You want to know where you're going, how are you going to get there to achieve the joy of actually getting into the profession you want to get into. And I don't care what it is. I don't care if you want to be a teacher or a doctor or a mechanic. It doesn't matter. As long as you have that desire, you can. I really believe you can make it happen. Maybe sometimes not in the way that you perceive, but there are people that have landed into the animation profession through different doors, different ways of getting in, and sometimes they didn't end up in the jobs that they thought they wanted. Sometimes they were talented somewhere else. Walt Disney was really good at identifying people at his studio at being good at different things. So people like Ex Atencio, who ended up writing the song Yo Ho, Yo Ho, Pirate's Life for Me. He scripted the attraction for Pirates of the Caribbean and also helped develop the Haunted Mansion and the song Grim Grinning Ghosts. Okay, he didn't write the music for it, but he had a talent for script writing. But this was a guy that came in as an animator, and he was doing stop motion animation. He got to do a lot of different things. And I think the same thing with Bill Justice. Bill Justice was a guy at the studio, was a good animator, a very good animator. He ended up becoming a director. And a few years later, he's programming audio animatronic figures, something that he probably could never foresee ending up doing, but that's what he ended up doing. And so you get people that are, like I said, they're talented, but they land in these different roles. And there was another guy, Blaine Gibson, that I like to point out, because he was he was an effects animator. But he was also this great sculptor. He was excellent at it, and he ended up sculpting the figure of Lincoln and also the sculpture of Walt Disney in front of the castle, holding Mickey Mouse's hand. He ended up doing that. But he ended up sculpting all the presidents in the Hall of Presidents up until a certain point. He hasn't done any of the recent stuff, but he was very good at capturing these likenesses. But he also sculpted all the stuff for Pirates of the Caribbean, the pirate characters and stuff. So if you're familiar with the theme parks, and I know some of you may not be, but if you are, there's a lot of artistry there. Well, today's guest is a guy who came up. He was very, very persistent. He wanted to get into animation, and he ended up finding a way. And he ended up at the Disney studio producing and directing, something that he never thought he would do. But he came up through the ranks and really just, persevered and became a major talent. His name is Tony Craig. He is the producer of Mickey Mouse Works and The House of Mouse and Leroy and Stitch and 101 Dalmatians, the series. He did a lot of good stuff, a lot of great stuff. And he started off his career at Warner Brothers working on Animaniacs and Tiny Toon Adventures. He's up next. Please stay tuned. Don't go away.
Cartoonerific is the place to be to celebrate hand-drawn animated cartoons. The Cartoonerific podcast features interviews with the magic makers behind your favorite animated cartoons, with episodes uploaded every Friday. Or visit the Cartoonerific blog featuring articles about classic cartoon animation. At the Cartoonerific Gallery, view original animation art and memorabilia from your favorite animated films and TV shows. The company store features exclusive swag from the Cartoonerific universe. And coming soon, brand new world premiere cartoons on the Cartoonerific channel. It's all here. Join the fun at www.cartoonerific.com. That's cartoon, ERIFIC.com. It's Cartoonerific, saving the universe one funny cartoon at a time. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, what can I say about this gentleman? I worked with him years ago at Warner Brothers. He did some very, very popular shows on the Animaniacs. He was a storyboard artist there, and he worked on Tiny Toon Adventures. Got a start at Warner Brothers, and then zoomed his way to the top. He was producer-director on House of Mouse and 101 Dalmatians, Lilo and Stitch for Disney. He is a multi-talented guy. He's still working in the business, and just bringing him on now. Here now is Mr. Tony Craig. How you doing, Tony?
Hello, everybody. How are you?
They said hello. Okay? They all said hello.
You can hear me? I hope so.
There we go. So, Tony, I know a little bit about your history, but tell me how did you get into this wonderful and wild world of cartoon animation?
Into the whole thing, huh?
Yeah, we're going to get right into it. So let's start in childhood. What, did you used to watch cartoons as a kid?
Yeah, we would always watch the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show was on. That was the iteration of it when I was a kid. And of course, like the Hanna-Barbera cartoons too. My brother was more fond of the Sid and Marty Krofft stuff. And I liked the Hanna-Barbera stuff and the Warner Brothers cartoons. We'd get up at 6. This is back, hey kids, it's back before TV was on 24 hours a day. You have to stare at static until 6 a.m.
That's right.
Mr. Magoo would come on, and then the Jetsons, and then finally the newer stuff would kick in.
Yeah, we didn't have 24 hours of Scooby-Doo on one channel back then.
I do kind of remember Mom and Dad taking me to see Pinocchio when I was still in a high chair.
Oh, wow.
That sticks out in my mind. I don't know if it's because there are photographs that I saw that triggered the memory, or if I really remember it. It's hard to tell because I was that young.
Right.
But I recall not being awake for most of the movie, but I was awake for the whale chase at the end. And maybe that triggered wanting to be an animator. Our public library had a copy of Christopher Finch's Art of Walt Disney, and it was a reference book, so you could not check it out.
Right.
But every time we went to the library, you would find me down at the end of that row, sitting there with the book, just pouring through it and studying it.
It was a beautiful book.
Great book.
Yeah, when it came out, my folks bought that book for me, the big, super duper supreme hardcover copy of that. And
Dad
and I
bought
poured
me
through
a
it.
lot of animation books, but I ended up saving my own money to buy that myself, and I bought my own copy of it
Cool.
from doing yard work. So then I would copy pictures out of it all the time, and I would copy pictures out of the how to draw books in the library too, not just the Disney stuff.
Right.
Still have all that stuff. Mom had saved it and said, "Here,
Well,
this stuff. We're tired of having it in the house."
it's hard.
So it's now in our house.
Right.
But yeah, that's how I got the start and wanted to be an animator, but I didn't really know how to go about doing it. I've had a friend that did stop motion animation with the Super 8mm movie camera.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know anything about animation exposure sheets or timing. We just kind of goof around with stuff. In fact, I didn't do any of it. He just showed me his movies, and I thought it was cool.
Right.
And but then my dad, being a teacher and drama teacher, where he was working, said his son had gone out to a school called California Institute of the Arts to study theatrical lighting, and had mentioned that there was an animation program because they knew I wanted to get into animation.
Right.
And so that kind of, hey, there's a place you can go to learn how to do it. So that's how we found out about Cal Arts, and I did not get in the first time that I applied.
Right.
So I had to work on my portfolio for another year, and then I got into a great class. I mean, everybody thinks there's good people that come out of their class, but my class had Pete Docter and Ash Brannon and Mark Kennedy and Chris Ewer and Tony and Tom Bancroft, who have opened up their own studio in Tennessee now.
Yeah, Pencilish.
There were a lot of great people in my class. And Charles Visser, we were just talking about him. He was there when I was there.
Yes.
Jenny LaRue and Jenny Hawes, a lot of fantastic people.
What years was that when you went?
I went 1987 to 89.
Wow.
Then I started working on Tiny Toons, where you were, and that's where I met you. Not initially on your crew. Initially, Art Leonardi hired me.
Oh, cool. Art's a great talent.
But I had no idea what I was doing, and after a week and a half, he realized that as well. So he had to say, I'm sorry, but I got to let you go because this was just a tryout, and I don't think you've got the chops for it yet. And of course, I was really upset.
Yeah,
but Kim Boyer had said, "Hey, I saw what you're doing. I want to have a team of young guys that we can all train and learn from each other." And so he brought me onto his unit.
Wow.
And that kind of started it. So Ken was the one that took me in and taught me everything that I needed to know. And they always say that eventually stuff will just kick in.
Yeah.
I didn't believe it, but it was true. All of a sudden one day, because I'd ask my teachers, Chris Buck, like, how do you get that rhythm you're talking about in your hand drawings and the dynamics? And he told me it'll just kick in, it'll come to you. And they were right, it did. So,
yeah, exactly. The one word I keep hearing over the years is perseverance. And I know you had that. I know you had the perseverance, and that a lot of people don't. A lot of people give up, and that's the killer. That's a killer of any creative dream. Is
if you give up, you're never gonna make it. So
yeah, got to really want it.
It's tough for a while, and you're taking the bottom rung salary because you're new to the industry. But I wanted to do it, and didn't really have any aspirations to be a producer and director then, because just hadn't thought of it. In fact, I wanted to be an animator and just fell into character layout first, and then character design, and then storyboards. So just picked up different jobs along the way and learned how to do them. And when I was at Hanna-Barbera with Donovan Cook, he taught me how to do animation exposure sheet direction.
Right.
And then I think I've learned how to do some animation just from boarding and going over scenes, calling retakes. The more you look at stuff, the more you see how it works.
Right.
And so, yeah, but I got to say, working at Warner Brothers at the time that we did was pretty crazy, because we were on the 11th floor of the Imperial Bank building.
That's right.
And I believe next to our offices was a phone sex company, because there were all these girls, really good looking girls, going into the restroom wearing lingerie. And I do know that the people that shot Tasmania knew that across from where they were was a X-rated film industry building or offices. So that was pretty weird.
Yeah.
Just some of the hijinks. so politically incorrect, a lot of the stuff that we did, that you'd never be able to maintain your job. I don't think there were really any rules there, and that was probably in a way like the original Termite Terrace. I don't know. What do you think? Would that be a fair assumption?
We did some pretty wild stuff over there. I mean, I know they were, somebody came in, they said, that coffee mate, if you put a flame to it, it will ignite almost like an explosion.
Yeah, like a fireball.
Fireball. So somebody got a bunch of coffee mate from the coffee room and went into the stairwell. Almost lit the place on fire. I mean, there were a lot of stories that I remember. Some of them were R or X rated. There was one that we try to keep it clean here on the Cartoonerific podcast, but I know we had a gentleman who his first name is Lawrence, and I think you remember this. But he was leaving, and somebody went over to the sex shop in, I think it was Woodland Hills, not Woodland Hills, Sherman Oaks, and they picked up this inflatable girl, and they had everybody autograph it, and that was his goodbye card.
I remember that.
You remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
I also remember the Wall of Shane. Who was that one guy? Shane it wasn't. It was Shane Poindexter.
Yes, the Wall of Shane. Yes.
All these drawings of Shane up and down the wall. In fact, I think that made it on the news when they came and did an interview for the local news station.
Right.
But yeah, that was just a crazy time. But like I said, I'd always wanted to be a Disney animator, I thought. So
right.
I had gone over to have lunch at Disney with Ken, and we saw the development for Rescuers Down Under.
Mm.
And it was done by Maurice Hunt. I think he goes by the name Peugeot now.
Yes, he's a New Yorker. He actually, when I went out to California back in '82, I called him at Disney. He was at Disney Studios at the time, and he gave me a tour of the backlot and the animation studio, which was very nice of him to do. And I only talked with him maybe once or twice after that, and then I lost contact. But he was an amazing talent. And I guess he still is an amazing talent. Hopefully he's still around.
Yeah, I didn't hear otherwise. But what he had developed was set in the rainforest with an Aborigine boy.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful. I said, I've got to work on this. And by the time my portfolio made it through the development or the portfolio review and hiring process, the movie was underway, and it was with the little Caucasian boy in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't what I wanted to do. And so I was just an in-betweener.
Yeah.
A break-in position at Disney, an in-betweener.
Right.
Learned how to clean up. And everybody was so serious over there compared to Tiny Toons and the like. This was 1990.
It had to be, well, you're talking about at Warner Brothers or at Disney working on that?
I think it was 1990. And everybody was so serious. If you tried to talk loud or laugh, people would come and tell you to keep it down, that they're trying to create art. And, and they had us working so hard. We were doing overtime, and they wanted you to come in Saturday and Sunday if you would, and they would pay it. And they catered our breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and had automatic deposit, direct deposit to the bank. So you didn't spend any money. You didn't go anywhere.
Right.
And then it was just a grueling April to August. And then all of a sudden, come September, that was the last scene. I was on the Joanna Gowanna unit.
Right.
And it was over. And you're still in that mode of working, and didn't know what to do with yourself. And they were starting up an animation program.
Mm-hmm.
And I told Bill Dennis I'd like to get into that.
Right.
It was pretty discouraging. And I thought, all right, I'll show you. I've been asked to go animate on the Family Dog TV show with Chris Buck. So I'm going to go do that.
Right.
And
sometimes you have to do that, you know.
I went over to do that, and that's where I met some other cool people like Gavin Dell and Brian Sheasley, and Clay Hall was over there. He was my director.
Mm-hmm.
But you could see that show was having some troubles, so I ended up going back to Warner Brothers to work on the video, how I spent my summer vacation,
Right.
which segued into the second season of Tiny Toons.
I think when I arrived there around that time because I was at Don Bluth's studio.
That's right. That's right.
Well, yeah.
And
we
then,
were having
believe it or
problems.
not, when we finished that, they did something they would never do now, which is they kept every single person employed for 9 months to develop Animaniacs,
Yes, I remember that.
which no studio would do that these days.
No
Nobody.
studio would do that, and I think we had 2 periods there. I think it was after Animaniacs, we had a lull too. I think before they kicked in for the last 35 episodes. Because
Yeah.
I think we did
I
60.
was gone by then.
Yeah.
I just did not care for, and people might hate me for this, I did not like Slappy Squirrel one little bit, and that seemed to be the only thing I got to board. And so I decided
Well,
to
you
just,
did a bunch of Pinky and the Brains, though, didn't
I
you?
did the first Pinky in the Brain, actually, where he wears that mechanical suit and goes on Jeopardy.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
that I was saying to somebody on another podcast, I said, Eddie Fitzgerald came down while we were developing Animaniacs, and he asked me, because he was developing Pinky and the Brain, and he asked me for ideas, and I threw out a couple of ideas, and I said, well, he said, how they take over the world? I said, I don't know, have them go on a game show. And he loved the idea, and he jotted it down, and he did his funny little laugh. And he said, this is great. This is great. And then he's like, what else? And I said, I don't know, have him become a country western singer. I was just throwing out stupid ideas. And it's funny, they took it. And that was the last I saw it. It was just ideas thrown out.
Yeah,
And then I was surprised you were doing Win Big. And I was like, holy crap, this is what, I mean, I didn't come up with the whole idea. I just came up with a germ of an idea, but you did a great job with Win Big. It's a classic.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Hastings really took, Peter Hastings wrote it, correct?
I can't remember if it was him or Paul Rugg or, I don't know. They kind of kept the writers and the artists separated.
Yeah.
At that time, I'm sad to say, I think we got a memo not to bother them at one point.
I think what happened was Ken Boyer, I guess he felt a little bit encouraged to go ahead, and I think they said you can take the scripts and you can, work them any way you need to. And I think what they meant was visually. And then all of a sudden, we had a meeting, and it was like he wasn't happy with any of the scripts, so we were like tearing the scripts apart and saying, "Hey, how about if they do this?" And we were like rewriting the stuff. And then
what we didn't understand was that they have to track all the new lines and re-record everything with the actors, and it's
and that's what happened. That's what I remember happening, unless you want to correct me, but
I don't recall anything. I just remember the memo.
Yeah. But then it was like after that, we got the show, we sent up the storyboard, and they were like, what the hell is this?
I remember that. Memo.
And then they came back and they said, you're not to deviate from the script. The script is the script. That is it. And then, you visualize the script, and that was the edict that came down. So, and yeah, I think everybody remembers that. And so that's what happened.
I remember putting in a lot of overtime that when we were doing because the crew for Ken on How I Spent My Summer Vacation consisted of me, Ken, and Larry Whitaker.
Oh.
Get this whole sequence done, and I ended up putting in a work week of about 104 hours.
Wow.
Under the desk and everything else. And so we put in our time cards and got balled out for that.
Yeah.
They did not want to pay that. And it just got to be ridiculous where I'd get scripts on Animaniacs that said, hundreds of sweaty workers toil to build the pyramids. Like, how the hell am I supposed to draw this in a TV budget and these tiny little panels? And when it got to the point where I'd done a whole show with a character shaking their hands, it was Pip Pump Handle, I guess, or he was Buddy Boar. He was an actual boar at first, and then they changed him to the guy that looked like Ben Stein.
That's right.
Shaking their hand. and I had drawn them shaking with the left hand just because that's how it happened to work out best for the staging.
Right.
And I got the note after the board was all done.
Have them shake with the right hand.
Nobody shakes with their left hand. Have them shake with the right hand. And I suppose I could have just flipped the whole board on the Xerox machine, but it just infuriated me. So that was now I remember, that was the straw that broke my back to leave. Hey, no, you do it. I'm going to do something else. I had nothing to go do, but I ended up going and freelancing and did clean up on some of the Daryl Von Sitter's Bugs Bunny shorts.
Oh, cool.
And
yeah, he's a great guy, Daryl.
Yeah, and then Donovan Cook, who was one of my classmates, directed Nightmare Ned at Disney TV, produced that, and Two Stupid Dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Said, "Do you want to come work on Two Stupid Dogs?" And I said I would. But then I also had gotten an offer from Disney to come be on the cleanup team of Scar on Lion King.
Oh, wow.
I was about to start, and Donovan said, "Hey, you promised you would come over and do this." So I'm glad he said that.
Right.
So I called Disney and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to take the job. I've got another commitment, and I can't do it."
Yeah.
I went to work on Two Stupid Dogs and ended up sharing an office with Robert Sganaway, who became one of my really good friends, and we worked together as a team for about 15, 16 years doing stuff,
right,
developing our own ideas, and that kind of people thought of it was Bob Zantoni. Hey, have you guys met Bob Zantoni? And they thought it was one guy, an Italian guy, Bob
Zantoni, yeah.
But, so we were kind of
Frank and Ollie, yeah.
Frank and Ollie, the Schoolie and McCorkle, that kind of thing. Bob Zantoni. So we had gone to work on Cats Don't Dance in the story department. We got to meet Gene Kelly. That was really cool. And then around that time, we developed our own idea to pitch around, and we had actually sold it to ABC. Chris Keenan, remember, he used to answer the phones at Tiny Toons, was the executive there at ABC at the time.
Oh, wow.
Loved it, bought it, but then they had an executive change, and out our show went.
Can you say what the show was? Or
it was just about a bear and a frog that wore a different hat every cartoon, and they had a different job every cartoon.
Oh, okay.
And so, but Fred Seibert kind of liked it for in fact, he was going to buy it for the What a Cartoon thing he was doing at Hanna-Barbera back when they had all that other stuff starting.
Right.
Powerpuff Girls, etc. But we didn't like the deal, so we sold it to ABC. They didn't buy it, and that's the way it goes, you know. So we had no deal with anybody, but we had pitched it to Disney Television Animation, and the executives there, like, we don't want to buy that, but we do want to make a duo comedy show with Timon and Pumbaa from The Lion King.
Oh.
And thought you guys were funny. We'd like you to come in and give us a pitch on it. And they ended up liking that pitch and hiring us over there. And that started us on our long career at Disney Television Animation.
What show was that?
That was Around the World with Timon and Pumbaa, the beginning of it.
Wow.
And so...
was that your first producer credit? Or
not at first. They teamed us up with Jeff DeGrandis so we could kind of learn the ropes from him.
Yeah, Jeff was a great guy.
And we did, but then he kind of moved on to something else, and we ended up being promoted up because we were there in the chairs, and ended up supervising the CBS shows too, which Eddie Houchins directed.
Mm-hmm.
One of our fantastic timers, still a good friend of mine. I just talked to him a couple of days ago.
Good.
And so that was two seasons of that for the Disney afternoon block and the afternoons and Saturday morning ones.
Right.
And Ernie Sabella was on it. I'll tell you a funny story about him in a minute. Nathan Lane was on it to begin with, but he decided he didn't want to do it, so he had to get a sound-alike for Timon. So I ended up working on The Lion King in a way after all, after not taking the cleanup crew on Scar.
Right.
And yeah, we had our pitch in a little suitcase. We put all these travel stickers on it, and we went in and we opened up and we took out the Timon and Pumbaa stuff and put the artwork around, and so that was a really fun show to work on because you're not locked down to any specific location. You can go anywhere, and we went pretty cartoony with the gags.
Sure.
But Ernie Sabella loved doing Pumbaa, and he came out to L.A. because I think he had been offered a shot to do a sitcom pilot, and he came out to do that. It didn't get made, but he had a house over there in the not Studio City. What's between Sherman Oaks and Toluca Lake, that area? You know where I'm talking about.
North Hollywood or
kind of. He was sort of right in between those, though, like off Lancashire or something.
Yeah.
And had just gotten this
Valley Village.
He just got this big Cadillac, and he was like, "Oh, you guys want to go for a ride in my car?" And so we went for a ride. He took us over to his house. He was showing us his theater room where he built these risers with those leather chairs that recline, that have the cup holders and everything, and the big projection thing.
Right.
And he put on AMC, and I remember the movie Tin Pan Alley was on, black and white musical was on. We're watching that. Hey, you guys want some cake? And he had bought a big cake from Patty's restaurant on Riverside Drive.
Yes.
Bought a big wedge of cake. And then he got a call from his agent and disappeared. And we're like, we got to go back to work. So we're sitting over there eating cake at Ernie's house, waiting for him to get off the phone so he'd take us back to the recording studio so we could get our cars and go back to work.
Right.
So the funny thing about that Cadillac was it stuck out about 1 foot from his garage, so he couldn't close the door of the garage. He was kind of like your fun uncle.
Wow.
You like to hang out with. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, and Disney was kind of his bread and butter at that point because he was doing a lot of work for them.
Yeah, and so, but then went through many executive changes. About the time the second season was done of that, Dean Valentine came in.
Yeah.
He didn't really care what we were doing because that show was about to finish up. So we ended up taking all the budget money from 2 episodes for music and just using reuse music for those and taking all that money and putting it into hiring a 60-piece orchestra to record classical music. And we did a whole thing that had no dialogue. It was all set to classical music called Bumble in the Jungle. And Beethoven's Swift. And Kex Singleton won a art director Emmy for working on the little Beethoven Swift thing. It was a 1.5 minute thing before the main cartoon. Mike Moon did quite an awesome job directing, art directing.
Right.
Mike's a phenomenal artist. I know he's a big shot executive now, and he's probably enjoying that, and it's taking care of him and his family. But I think that it's a shame that his talent as an artist is not being utilized because he was just one of the most talented people I've ever known in the industry.
Wow. Pretty neat.
But anyway, at any rate.
Yeah, I remember Kex winning that. I remember hearing about that.
There was that executive change, and Dean Valentine's in, and the 101 Dalmatians movie had just come out, the John Hughes remake. And they're like, we got to do a series. And we're going to do it with we just bought Jumbo Studios in New York with Jim Jenkins and David Campbell. And if we play our cards right, Nickelodeon's going to let their contract run out on Doug, and then we're going to grab it. And Jim didn't say anything. Nickelodeon didn't pick it up, and Disney bought it up and did a season of Doug for Disney instead of Nickelodeon.
Right.
And
you weren't involved with Doug, though, were you?
No, but we went out because he was going to be the executive producer of the 101 Dalmatians show.
Right.
Bob and I were just going to have a unit along with 3 other units.
Right.
But we were kind of the ones developing it. So we went to New York a couple of times and developed it with him and got it going. And then Jim and David are like, wait a minute, this is way more complicated than what we'd been doing with Doug. How are we going to manage looking at all this artwork from 4 crews in LA, as well as the crew we have here in New York?
Right.
So they promoted Bob's and I to executive producers also to work on 101 Dalmatians, and we ended up putting Rick Schneider in charge of our crew, and then we supervised all 4 crews in LA. Right. And that was such a blur. 65 half hours in a year.
Wow.
And the directors were Vic Cook, Kim Boyer, Skip Jones, and Rick Schneider.
Right.
And then people in New York, and it was just, I can't even remember hardly anything that happened that was 1996, 97.
Well, with that much work, it becomes a blur. It's like, you're answering questions on the fly and you're making decisions on the fly, and you got to move on to the next thing. So is there any particular episode that stands out for you as being like, oh, this is fantastic? This is the gem.
That Bumble in the Jungle that I mentioned in Timon and Pumbaa stood out well. And then there were some neat backgrounds in the cartoon that went with that called Mind Over Matterhorn. We tried to base all of our... I'd just gotten into the Little Golden Books, and I was having them paint the backgrounds with the skies of yellow, magenta,
right,
these crazy colors, and they did this really graphic. Mike did this really graphic stuff of the Matterhorn Mountain, and the backgrounds were fantastic.
Wow.
I mean, we're getting into Maurice Noble kind of territory for that, which you wouldn't expect for a Disney cartoon.
Was there any Mary Blair influence from there too, or just?
Yeah. So I think they were looking pretty great. Dalmatians. This at the time, and here's the reason for this. I liked Alphonse Mucha, the Art Nouveau artist, and I liked the drawings that he would do with a thick contour line around the girls on the posters he did.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? We can't do the Xerox line from 101 Dalmatians. And consistency-wise, we know that there's a big shift in difference of the way things look between the overseas animation studios. Because an Australian show was better animated than a show that was done in Korea, perhaps, and then they had shows in Japan, and you could always tell the difference.
Right.
We thought, let's try doing the characters on the 101 Dalmatians show with a thick contour outline and thinner inner lines, and at least we'll have that consistency amongst all the studios.
Mm-hmm.
And it did have a cohesive look to it, although we caught hell from all the fans for doing that look.
Right.
And that was before that became the Cartoon Network style to have the thick outer lines on everything. I think the only other show doing that at the time was Daria on MTV.
Right.
And so I thought we were kind of setting a precedent in that way for Dalmatians, but that's all I really remember about that show. I don't remember any storylines. I remember goofy stuff that happened. I remember one of the sheet timers had a scene with Lieutenant Pug, who was running so fast that he ran to a silo and then ran straight up the side of it. But there was so much dialogue because the scripts were excessively heavy with dialogue.
Right.
He couldn't do it all in that amount of time, so he just had him walk. He walked up the silo and he just started walking right up the side of the silo. Like, what the heck is this? I remember that. I remember we had a bunch of people like Tom Ray who had been animating with Chuck Jones.
Right.
On Roadrunner cartoons, was on one of the crews, and we had it was a huge bunch of people, talented people. Speaking of Chuck Jones, in between things at Cats Don't Dance, Bob's and I were invited to come over and do work with Chuck Jones briefly, where Warner Brothers had given him free reign to bring in people and start developing story ideas for cartoons. I think they just did that so they could get the rights to his signature as a trademark.
Yeah.
But we went over and we had developed we boarded out a Porky and Sylvester cartoon where they were night watchmen in a department store.
Right.
Now I probably would have done something that was a little bit more current, but it could have been a cartoon out of the 1940s. And he really liked it. And it was neat getting to meet him and have him tell me he liked the artwork. And he took us all to lunch at the commissary.
Right.
And we'd see him every now and then in that building because there was a restaurant on the ground floor that we'd go to sometimes, and we'd see him come out of the elevators often. So it was really good getting to know him and meet him. And we would go hang out with Maurice Noble. Rick Schneider was friends with him, and we would go over to Maurice's house, and he'd just talk about the good old days, and we'd take him out to eat, and then he'd let us buy his serigraph, his silkscreen prints that he hand-pulled out of his portfolio of his fine art.
Right.
So I've got about 5 or 6 of those.
Oh, wow.
And I'm really happy to have those, and to have got to meet him too.
Yeah.
And we worked at Hanna-Barbera when Hanna and Barbera were there. And
yes.
So, and we worked at Disney when Roy Disney, Walt's nephew, was there. Here's a guy who was at the premiere of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and you're sitting in his office just hanging out with him and talking about animation, and he's going over all our cartoons for Mickey Mouse Works.
Right.
We got to work with a lot of people on the tail end of that era. But yeah, after that blur of Dalmatians, I remember we were at Barry Blumberg. I think he was executive vice president or somebody in charge of things. I know he was in charge of things. I don't know what his title was then, but he had all this Mickey Mouse stuff out on the bulletin board outside his office. And I said, "Hey, Barry, who's developing that Mickey Mouse stuff?" And he said, "You guys are." So we did. That's how we got that. I said, "Who's doing it?" He said, "You are." And so we did it.
You're doing it. I just want to go back a little bit because I know we're going to backtrack. We're just going to go back through the years to you wrote to Frank Thomas, right?
Didn't work with him. Just wrote him a letter when I was in high school to ask him about animation because Mom and Dad had given me The Illusion of Life as a Christmas present when I was maybe a senior in high school.
Right.
I wrote him a letter, and he wrote back to me twice. I wrote and asked him what he thought of the computer animation that was being used in Great Mouse Detective, and he said he thought Walt would have been all for it because he was always pushing the boundary to try to find new ways of doing things.
Right.
And he wished everybody in animation well, but he said he doesn't do any drawing anymore much. And I saw him in the commissary years later when we had all got moved onto the lot for Mickey Mouse Works.
Right.
I went up to him and said, "Hey, Frank, I wrote you letters when I was in high school, and here I am." And he said, "I'm to blame, huh?"
Those guys, Frank and Ollie, were often on the Tonight Show. They would appear on the Tonight Show, and my father worked nights. He would call. He would let me know the next day. Oh, yeah, two of your buddies were on the night before. I said, "Two of my." What do you mean? He said, "I don't know, two guys from Disney Studios. They were on, two animators, and he said they're very, very funny, and they were. They're very. If you haven't seen Frank and Ollie, that's the film made by Frank's son. So it's a very humorous film, but it's you want to learn a little bit about animators, geez,
Yeah, I've read their book is one great way to find out about what it was like. And then John Kaymaker's The Night on Men is another good book.
Oh, yeah, it's great because it gets everybody's perspective on it, like who these guys were. I have them. They're sitting here, just gathering dust right now, but I refer to them from time to time.
Yeah, I regret, though, I've could have made the effort to go visit Ward Kimball and see his trains and everything before he passed away, and I just never did, and I regret that I didn't ever do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't you? Well, I went to see Ward Kimball, and I brought. Trying to think who went. Joey Banaskowitz went, and
Cynthia went, I think, and maybe Philip.
Phil Mosnes and Kex Singleton.
Okay, Cynthia must have gone on her own a different time.
No, well, she might have went back without me. No, she was there.
Okay.
Cynthia was there. No, it was like 5 of us.
Yeah, he donated his trains to the Orange Empire Railway Museum, so I got to see the trains there, but it would have been cool to hang out with him.
Yeah, and I think John Lasseter bought Chloe, which was a smaller engine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he bought the property that...
he had to be doing...
Oh, no, he had another piece of property. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, he had to be doing pretty well salary-wise to be able to afford to buy a whole railroad.
John Lasseter?
No, Ward Kimball.
Oh, Ward, yeah. Well, he bought that stuff for like pennies on the dollar. That's what I heard. Because they're just going to dump it, and then he restored it. He restored all those engines.
Probably, yeah, did the restoration.
Yeah.
Well, that's good if you've got the talent. I can't fix a thing.
Well, the interesting thing about Ward Kimball, he was not only an animator, he was a musician, he was a pilot, he was a railroad enthusiast, he was a collector of railroads and antique toys.
A fine artist.
A very fine artist. Did these kinetic sculptures.
5+2 albums on vinyl.
Oh, you have them on vinyl?
Yeah.
They're most of them are still available on CD. They put them all out on CD.
I've got those too, but I'm happy to have them all on vinyl.
Yeah, but Kimball autographed, I think, the one of those albums he autographed for me, which was nice. So
yeah, anybody listening, you should look up their music. It's really, they would just sit around and play instruments along with Dixieland jazz records on their lunch break.
That's right.
Have a jam session, and they thought, we don't sound half bad.
Well, I think the record player broke down. They were playing to the music, and all of a sudden the record player broke down. They didn't even notice.
Oh.
They said, yeah, I guess they felt, well, maybe we should play out. So they started out as the Hugajiti 8.
Yeah, but they got a lot of bookings.
They got a lot of bookings, and they were on TV. On TV a lot, and they used to perform at Disneyland a lot.
Yeah, in the Golden Horseshoe Review Building.
Exactly. So, yeah. And there is an album. There is a live recording from the Golden Horseshoe, which you can probably still buy. Firehouse 5+2 at Disneyland. And it's Frank Thomas, Ward Kimball, and I think Jimmy McDonald, who was Mickey's voice at the time, and interesting stuff. How did you get... Okay, so I know you got onto the House of Mouse, and they wanted to do a Mickey Mouse show. Did Roy call you in? Wasn't that his project, or was that an
No,
Eisner thing?
Well, Barry told us to develop it, and Bob's came up with the idea, let's just make cartoons. And at the time, it was called Mickey Mouse Works.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're just going to take these characters, and we're just going to start making cartoons with them again. So
Right.
Bob's did the outline for Mickey's new car, and Roy liked it, and so he had his backing and his blessing, and we went to Eisner, and
Did you
pitched the whole
sit? Did you
thing.
sit with Eisner, or
Yeah, we were with Eisner, Joe Roth, I think, all of them, Peter Schneider.
Wow.
And Eisner was like, "Is this good?" And somebody said, "Yeah, it is." And he's like, "Oh, okay." I don't know if he really didn't know if it was good or not, or if he just was like, I don't know why he asked that. But anyway, we got the blessing to go ahead and do it.
That's wonderful. That,
And
you know,
so
you have to refer to somebody else to say, "Is this good?" Yeah, I think it's good. Okay, it's good.
let's do it.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
anyway, we made the cartoons, but then we did get called in after we had done about 2.5 seasons. We were going to do 65, but we didn't make it to that.
Right.
The ratings weren't as good as Pokemon. What was going to be better than Pokemon at the time.
Right.
And it could have had something to do with the fact that they put us on at noon, which meant that we were preempted by college football in most broadcast markets.
Right.
Because they didn't want to go up against the other stuff for ratings with me. They didn't want Mickey Mouse ratings to be trumped by some other show.
Right.
And so I don't know how many people really saw it. It did win the Annie Award for the best show of that year. Mickey Mouse Works did. But basically they said, you got to retool this and rethink it or we're going to stop doing it. So we went away for 9 weeks, had to let the crew go, get people to take their vacations. Some people got put onto other shows for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we developed it into this cartoon club called the House of Mouse, where they would have a big screen and show the cartoons. And any Disney character that had been ever created would show up in this place, and we could do gags with the interstitial material in between.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever Pocahontas showed up, the wind was always blowing her hair and the leaves were always swirling around her. Cinderella was always losing her shoe. We could do a gag where Jiminy Cricket, Goofy gets to be in charge of seating people, takes over for Donald one day and decides to put Jiminy Cricket with Timon and Pumbaa, who are like, yum, a snack. They put the Mad Hatter with Judge Claude Frollo from Hunchback. The Mad Hatter's, oh, I say, you're frumpy. So, yeah, the Big Bad Wolf sitting with Bambi and Thumper.
Right.
So,
Were you able to influence the storylines on the show? I mean, I know you developed the show, but
I didn't handle that stuff. I trusted Bob's and Jess Winfield Jess was on the Lilo and Stitch, but I trusted Bob's to do the stories, and he trusted me to do the artwork.
Right.
And it got to where I wouldn't go to the recording sessions, Bob's would, because I'm like, how many people do you need in the booth shouting out ideas?
Right.
And there's plenty of stuff to do back at the office, so I'll go handle that. So that's just how we ended up splitting up the duties.
Right. That works sometimes. It worked for Hanna-Barbera.
It worked well for us, too.
Yeah.
And so they liked the House of Mouse thing. Sean Bishop boarded the little pilot for it, where they weren't running the cartoons, and Minnie runs back to Mickey and says, Mickey, you got to get the show going. The crowd's turning ugly. And so the prince poofs and turns into the beast. Maleficent poofs and turns into the dragon. And or like all of a sudden the movie is blocked, and Horace Horsecollar, who's running the projection booth, yells, out of the way, Dumbo. And then you see that it's Dumbo had flown up and it's blocking the projector.
Right. Wow.
So we brought out some of the most obscure characters ever. Like in the Christmas show, we had the cookies from the Cookie Carnival. We had all these silly symphony characters showing up. We even did a black and white cartoon with the old black and white Mickey Mouse style, which actually we got Wayne Allwine, the voice of Mickey, to record his dialogue on the microphone that Walt Disney used to use.
Oh, wow.
Fished it out of the Imagineering building and hooked it up, and we used that microphone.
Oh, wow. That's very neat.
And so, yeah, it was, and we timed it all to the music beat and the track. I still think that one problem with that was it had too much talking. There wasn't a lot of talking in those 1920s cartoons. They were mostly musical driven. So
musical driven, a lot of pantomime. And
that would be the drawback to Mickey and the Goat Man. It had too much talking, I thought, but I still enjoy the cartoon.
Sure.
came out pretty well.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a fun show to work on, and we were on that for 4.5, 5 years, longer than high school.
Wow.
The only
Wow.
thing I've been on since that's longer than that is Animaniacs, which I'm still on until the end of November.
Oh, the new
About
episodes.
4.5 years, the reboot.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
Very neat.
so yeah, that was fun. And then Lilo and Stitch. They wanted to develop a show about Lilo and Stitch, and we came up with that stuff. And basically, if Stitch is 626, then there's got to be 625 other failed attempts that Jumba has buried somewhere. So
That's
we came up with that.
that's a great concept. I just want to get back to House of Mouse. Those characters were pretty much sacred, like all the characters for House of Mouse. You know, when you're talking about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because I know they were in the show at some point. I know Snow White was definitely.
Yeah, to make sure that we stayed true to the character. We would do a joke, but not at the expense of something that wouldn't make sense. But we had a special character design person to take any shot that had a classic feature character and draw it all on model to send to the overseas studio, so we knew that we were drawing them properly.
Right. Who was doing the overseas on that? Was it the Disney?
Toon City, and it was in Manila.
Mm-hmm.
The MouseWorks had the disadvantage of being the first cartoon that they were trying to learn how to use the computer-aided paint system.
Right.
So, of course, there are a lot of errors and things like that got ironed out, but I wish that they hadn't have been making those errors on our show.
Right.
Then on House of Mouse, we actually had a supervisor from Canada go over there and work with them to make sure that those feature characters were properly done. And I think the furthest along we got as far as including feature characters was the characters from Atlantis. Atlantis wasn't out yet, but we knew it would be out by the time the show premiered, so we had them in one bit.
Right.
They were just standing around outside, just filler stuff. But
standing around looking for Atlantis.
I guess so.
Okay.
We did 65 half hours of that, and it was pretty well received, I think. But the thing that boggles me is you still can't see Mickey Mouse Works or House of Mouse on Disney Plus. I don't know why they haven't put them on yet.
I think they're primarily focused on the newer shorts that they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean,
and with Roy going over everything, we had to stay pretty true to the designs of Mickey and Minnie at the time. They would absolutely not let us do anything like what Paul Rudish had done with the latest Mickey Mouse stuff.
Right.
That was at the time, absolutely not, no way, never.
Who was that? Was that from Roy Disney himself, Roy Jr.?
Pretty much. He did. It was cool though, because studio in Canada did the animation on our first few, and Roy flew us up to Canada on his private jet.
Oh wow, that must have been a thrill.
It was. I've never been on a private jet before, and it was pretty neat.
Right.
His leg was in a cast because he'd crashed his car in Ireland. He was driving on the wrong side of the road. And had
we call it the wrong side of the road, but that's the right side of the road. So I guess he was driving on our side of the road.
Fortunately, he didn't get killed. Also, I remember another malady he had when he was looking at our cartoons. His retina detached.
In the middle of the cartoon?
It's like, well, Roy was looking at your cartoon and his retina detached. We're like, oh no, we blinded Roy Disney. But we go with the smokehouse often.
You put something obscene in there, and then his eyeballs popped out, and the retina popped out.
I don't know, but yeah. And he, of course, sat in Walt Disney's old office, so it was fun to be up there too.
Didn't he end up? He ended up in the Hat Building, though. That was later, right?
That was ceremonial. He didn't move over there.
Ah.
He set up the building, and he kept his office over in Walt's old space.
So, have you ever seen what is it? Driving? No, it's not Driving. It's oh god, it's the Mr. Banks movie. It's the
Saving Mr. Banks. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So is the layout there exactly how Walt Disney's office was? I mean, judging by that movie, does that?
Well, Roy had it set up differently.
Yeah.
In fact, he had a sail. He won several sailing races.
Oh yes, I know that.
It's on a boat with Pyewacket, and we saw this big sculpture in his office, and you're like, what is that? And he said, well, it's the trophy for next year's race. I didn't like the way it looked, so I had it ask him if I could redesign it. And so he had the trophy sitting over that he had carved sitting over in his office.
Wow.
But the cool thing was everybody would give him all the free books or give him all the books or anything that was coming out, and he'd just give them to us. Say, I don't need all this stuff in my office. So we got he just gave us that big French Mickey Mouse book.
Oh, wow.
Pierre Lambert one, and that's a $200-$300 book. Here, go, just take it.
Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, was he? I take it he was very pleased with House of Mouse.
Yeah, I think he was pleased with it.
Yeah.
He really seemed to enjoy it.
Good.
I think he enjoyed working on it too. We got him to be a voice in one of the cartoons.
Which one was that?
It's Mickey and Mickey's mix-up.
Mm-hmm.
Mickey had sent a fax to Mortimer saying, "I hate you, you stink, drop dead." And that was at the end because Mortimer had messed up something between him and Minnie.
Right.
And so Mickey sent the fax, and Mortimer's like, "What fax, Mick?" He's like, "Oh no, if you got this other fax I sent to Minnie, who got the one I sent to you?" And then we did a cartoon version of Roy going, "Huh? What did I ever do to him?" He drove over in his Ferrari to record the voice over at the sound studio, and then we were going to do live action, but they wouldn't let us do live action. I guess SAG and all that stuff.
Right. So
Live action directors.
Animated Roy Disney it was.
Yeah, we animated him.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Was he happy with that?
Yeah, he thought it was a lot of fun.
Good. Very neat. Very neat. So after that, you jumped. That finished up in a couple of years. You had a long run with that, though.
Yeah, that was like 5 years, and then it came time to do the Lilo and Stitch show that we already spoke about.
Right. Now, how'd that come about? Did they decide? Somebody came down and said, "You're doing Lilo and Stitch," or did you just decided to?
They let people pitch ideas. There were 4 groups that pitched an idea. Jess Winfield had one.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that had done The Weekenders, I don't remember his name, did one. And Bob's and I did one, and somebody else did one. And they kind of liked ideas from 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to combine Bob's and I, Jess, and that Weekenders producer together. But the Weekenders producer and Bob's and I didn't see, they liked one aspect of his thing, but he did not want to get on board with what Jess and Bob's and I wanted to do. And he said he would buck us every step of the way. So they ended up buying him out and saying, well, we're going to buy out this part of the idea and just have these guys produce it.
Right.
Which was smart. I guess at least they paid him.
Right.
And so we had to kind of work his ideas in. And the show came out fine. It started with a video sequel,
mm-hmm.
65 half hours, and then a movie to wrap it up.
Right.
Which tested pretty well. It was called Leroy and Stitch.
Right. It was a pretty big movie for direct to video.
Yeah,
right?
I think that they had tested it in theaters, and it tested really well.
Why didn't they just put it in theaters then?
I hate to say that the people doing the video sequel division didn't want the competition, but I don't think they wanted the competition to take away from the Lilo and Stitch. That Stitch has a glitch, that movie.
Yes.
So ours got delayed until that one came out, and by that time the series was over.
Right.
About a year. Nobody knew why they were doing this movie so late, and then people really didn't connect it to the series. It didn't have the momentum it did at the time.
Right.
And that's about the time I decided I was ready to move out of LA, and they wanted me to produce a Winnie the Pooh preschool show, but I don't really enjoy the preschool stuff so much.
Right.
And I had purchased a grist mill that was built in 1880 in North Carolina, where I'm from. And I'm like, I could just freelance, and I could move back there and really enjoy life and do what I want to do and travel and not be working so hard and chase. I'm out here chasing the money. I feel like I'm turning into a real jerk. I'm having a lot of road rage. I've wasted so many hours sitting in traffic, driving to and from work. I'm kind of sick of this.
Yeah.
The wildfires, eventually there's going to be a fire come through the canyon behind my house. I'm sure of it.
Right.
That hasn't happened yet, but I just felt like my parents were getting up there. It was time to kind of go back and spend some good time with them. And so I did, and thought I'd sell my house out in California. And then right about that time, it's when the housing market tanked.
Uh,
Stuck with a house that's underwater out there, trying to make ends meet.
right.
2009 comes along, and everybody's out of work in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's when you get to the point where you're like, I'm never going to work again. I'm through. What am I going to do?
Right.
Fortunately, it all turned around, but
Yeah. It cycles. The
yeah.
business cycles. It's that's the way it is. But it's the thing is when you're working like crazy like that, when you're doing 65 episodes, and I'll just put it this way, not that they don't have quality, but it almost feels like you're just pooping the stuff out, and
there's a ratio. A third of them are going to be really good, a third of them are going to be okay, and then a third of them are really going to stink.
Yeah.
That's always been the ratio for any show I've worked on.
Yeah. And you actually see that with Warner Brothers cartoons too, like the old so-called classic Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
Because you got some that are real gems, and then you got some that are absolute stinkers, and you don't hear about those too much because they don't put them on the DVDs, and but there are some cartoons it's like you kind of shrug and you're like, okay,
yeah, it wasn't too funny.
Yeah. But I think it's because of the volume, and they had a good working time, but like I said, when you're doing 65 half hours in a year, it's a tremendous amount of work. I mean, to get one show going is a lot of work, and then we gotta do 64 more.
I was burnt out, and I'd worked a little bit directing on Emperor's New School.
Right.
And Bob's had a feature at Stars in development that we thought we might do. If I'd sold the house before doing that, I would have been fine.
Right.
But I decided to try sticking it out for a little bit more, and then the Stars thing, the feature at Stars, they were just building up the value of the company by putting all this stuff into production.
Right.
And then they sold it, and the people that bought it just wanted it for the video library, so they canceled everything.
Right.
And I'm like, what? I'm going to go. So in 2008, I packed up and moved back and was freelancing. And like I said, 2009 got to a downtime. My computer crashed, or the hard drive died.
Yeah.
So I borrow money from my folks to buy a new computer so I could even work if I could get work.
Yeah.
And wasn't until Vic Cook gave me some work on a Scooby-Doo thing he was doing that I started to get good jobs again. I'd pick up stuff from overseas studios, but the salary is less than half what you could get in LA. So it was just enough to kind of keep going.
Right.
And, but then through people like Vic, he was not able to take on a show for Hallmark. I guess he's got the connections and stuff. He couldn't take on two things he couldn't take on. He passed my way, was to do a Christmas special for Hallmark with their little Hoops and Yo-Yo character.
Yes.
On the greeting cards.
Right.
And I'm not going to say too much about that, but ended up working on that with the producer from House of Mouse and Mickey Mouse Works. And we would go back and forth from Kansas City, and I came back out to California to sell my house before it went into the capital gains tax mode. And so that was just the kind of thing I needed, directing job again and the good salary so that I could sell the house and get ahead. And it came out pretty well. They aired it for about 5 years.
Right.
And then I got on at Warner Brothers with Spike and
Tony.
Spike and Tony. Spike, it's Tony Cervoni and Spike Brandt, right?
Right.
And they were doing the Looney Tunes show.
Right.
So I was working on that, and then Fred Flintstone wrestling thing. And about that time, another show came up Vic couldn't take, which was a Lilo and Stitch. I guess a guy in China named Rick Wong had some money and got investors, and he wanted to do their version of the show. And he ran into Vic somewhere in LA through some mutual friends that knew Vic and him. And Vic said, I can't do it, but you should talk to Tony Craig, because he was the executive producer of it, and he probably could do it. And so that started me working with this studio in China, Shanghai, to do the Stitch and I. They did 13 episodes, and it was a really well done show.
Right.
And I always knew that you could work remotely because I was directing that show remotely from here, and they were in China.
Right.
And it came out great. We had editors freelancing in LA, and I'd listen to the score and make notes. I'd make notes on the retakes and look over the animation and make notes. And so it came out well. I took a few trips to China
Right.
maybe 3 or 4 trips to Shanghai
Right.
to do it. And so, yeah, I knew you could work remotely. I had gotten turned down for a lot of jobs before that because I was here and they didn't want somebody who wasn't in-house. But
Right.
uh,
That situation has kind of changed now.
yeah,
With
yeah. And after that, I was working on Be Cool Scooby-Doo with Zach Moncrief producing, and that led into Chris Bailey's Scooby-Doo Guess Who with the guest stars.
Right.
And then I heard that Joanne Estuesta, who was the art coordinator on Mickey Mouse Works and House of Mouse, was the new producer on the reboot of Animaniacs. So immediately I got in touch with her and said I would like to come on to that. And I think that they were, I don't know if they were hesitant at first, but they brought me on and I did some boards and they liked it. And that was 4 years ago, I think. And I'm still on it. And it just worked out well without a break because if you learn how to do many things in animation, and I have a habit of drawing my storyboards insanely clean and on model, even though they tell me to draw stuff rough, I cannot do it.
Right.
And so,
well, that's
well because the model department saw, look at these boards, they're so on model. He's drawing our drawings so well that when they needed somebody to come on and go over retakes for second season and put things on model,
right,
they brought me on to do that without a break. And so I was doing that. And then they decided, well, you know what? Instead of us spending all this money to fix these retakes, we need to start a unit on third season that takes our storyboards and puts them completely on model. And would you like to supervise that? And I said, yeah. And this is during COVID. So everybody had to go work remotely.
Right.
The orientation was done remotely. So they said, just get them to do the orientation and hire them full time as a full-time employee again. So finally, I was no longer a freelancer and was a full-time employee of the studio again.
Working remotely
because everybody was working remotely.
Yeah.
And that's worked out well. That they had shipped me a computer because they don't want you to use your personal computer. But, you know, they've got people in Atlanta and New York and all over the place. We've got people in Texas and up in Washington State. So,
right.
Yeah, COVID, as bad as it was, worked out well for me in that respect, being able to show, yeah, you can work remotely. See, everybody's doing it well. And hopefully it won't go back to where they could say, yeah, you got to come into the office, because I wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just a matter of control, but you can work remotely and still get the control. You know, you can show
I think
people.
They saw that people don't want to goof off. We want to make cartoons. We like drawing. We like making the stuff.
Yeah.
And everybody was hitting the deadlines, and the show was well done. I really admire Genevieve Tsai's design take for the Animaniacs reboot. I think that a lot of the overseas animation on the original Animaniacs show was hit and miss as far as the way they drew it.
Yeah. You really didn't know what you're going to get.
A lot of the drawings in the show are grotesque. I hate to say it, but they're just grotesque.
Yeah.
And I think that her redesigns are the best thing about this show. They're a lot of fun to draw. They're dynamic. They've got some style, and she's got style, fantastic style. And so after we finished the storyboards, I've still been helping out with layouts, or not layouts, but retakes. Right now, I'm learning harmony and animating on the scenes that we decide to pull in and redo, because we don't feel like the overseas studio is going to get it.
Yeah.
They're not getting it. This is a take 5. We need to just bring it in, and we need to work on this here. So basically, a lot of what I'm doing is reanimating dialogue sync, mouth shapes, and sometimes new stuff completely, but mostly just fixing dialogue sync and making gags read better, redoing timing. So it's a lot of fun.
Good. You're enjoying life. Where are you? In South Carolina, North Carolina?
North Carolina, on the coast now. But yeah, I've been exploring, doing a lot of fine art. I've gotten watercolor paintings purchased by museums. I've had paintings get juried into the annual Birds and Art Show at the Lee Yawkey Woodson Museum in Wausau, Wisconsin, 3 years. And just went up to that this past September for the first time attending the opening. They ended up buying my painting from last year to be in their permanent collection.
How do you work? Do you work in oils, or are you working watercolor? Yeah.
Yeah. If anybody wants to check them out, it's Facebook. Just search for Tony Craig AG. That's for Art Gallery, Tony Craig AG. And if you'd like to see comic strips of our dogs, I did a submission to the syndicates, which was received well. They wanted me to flesh it out some more, but I didn't think comic strips were they were a dying art form. I didn't think that would be a smart thing to get into. But
Right.
if you want to see the strips, it's facebook.com/Cooper, COOPER, and AND, Liam, LIAM comics.
There you go.
You can see comic strips about our dogs.
We'll put a post on the Cartoonerific website, so if you go there, and Tony, I'll share it onto the Cartoonerific Facebook page as well. You just send me a link to that, and I'll take care of that. But we'll put a little post on there, a blog post about you and your paintings, and if you want an original from Mr. Tony Craig, the amazing, talented artist that worked on a lot of those Disney shows, you can get it right there.
The hot ticket is my framer was throwing away a molding sample that was no longer available, and I said, well, let me paint something small. I'm sure I can paint something small, and you can frame it with that.
Right.
And I just painted a Pepsi Cola bottle cap, and people have been going nuts to get paintings of these bottle caps. So, and you'll be able to see those, but I'm doing large-scale paintings, too.
Very neat. Hey, Tony, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about your history and your rise to stardom in the animation world.
See you later.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Well, thank you, Tony, for spending some time with us talking about your career. Tony is a wonderful artist, and he's doing these paintings they're miniature paintings of bottle caps and matchbook covers. It's on his site, so check it out, tonycraig.art, and I believe he's making those available for sale, and I guess they're in many collections around the country, so very interesting to take a look at that. So tonycraig.art, check it out. Well, what do you know? We've come to the end of another Cartoonerific podcast, and that's always sad, I know. Anyway, I just want to let everybody know a good way of supporting us and supporting the show is by going to our company store and checking out some of the items there. If you buy a cup or a jacket or something like that, you help support us. But we also have the Cartoonerific Gallery that is now open, and that features original animation art, animation memorabilia, and even theme park collectibles. So you can support us by going over there, and if you see something you like, purchase it. You're basically supporting the podcast and everything we do here at Cartoonerific. So check that out. It's www.cartoonerific.com. Anyway, if you like what you're listening to, please subscribe or tell a friend. Very important. Anyway, I want everybody to have a great day, have an excellent week, and thank you once again for tuning in.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.